20 or so kilometers as the crow flies from Sydney, there is a community, or what was once a community, a model town, a place that was supposed to be one of Canada's first planned communities. And that town is Broughton. And if you look it up on a map, you'll find it, and you'll find the community boundaries, but there's not much left there anymore. It's a ghost town, one of Canada's most famous ghost towns, full of intrigue. And it's where I'm headed, along the old Ferguson Road, on today's Walkabout. I started my hike today just off the Horn Road, very close to Myra, which, even if you are unfamiliar with Cape Breton geography, you've almost certainly heard Alistair McGillivray's song, Out on the Myra, referring to the river which flows from here to the ocean. What is now a trail was once the Ferguson Road, and it traveled through to the center of Broughton, a town that attracted worldwide interest. There are homes, cabins, and cottages in the area, but few, if any, would use the name Broughton for an address. Most around here would likely say they live out on the Myra. Well, the late 19th and early 20th century was basically the coal boom in Cape Breton. And around 1901, a man named Edgar Moseley found coal near Lake Loon, which I will reach near the end of this hike. He mined 4 or 5 tons, built a wagon road of about 3 miles down to the Myra River, where he built a wharf and shipped it out. And that wagon road may very well have followed the same route that I'm walking right now. This was the start of the Cape Breton Coal, Iron and Railway Company, headed by 2 Englishmen, Colonel Horace Mayhew and Thomas Lancaster. They had millions of dollars in capital to work with and invested to build a coal mine. Most of those funds came from England. It was an enormous sum in the day, and they had big plans. Colonel Mayhew was a well-respected businessman in England, where he was a county magistrate, chairman of 5 companies, and even ran a number of collieries. Lancaster was involved in the early study of coal deposits and became instrumental in raising funds from English investors. It was Lancaster who convinced Mayhew to become involved. But history hasn't been kind to the founders, and many wonder whether they ever truly intended to build a coal mine or not. So for Mayhew and Lancaster, this was really about much more than just a coal mine. This was about building a town, and not just any town, a town that would be the envy of not just Canada, but the whole world. Now, if you're going to do that, you have to bring on the best architect. So in 1904, they brought in William Critchlow Harris. Well, he came down and in 1905 set himself up in a Myra farmhouse and developed plans for a hotel that he gave those coal mine managers. Big things were happening. Harris was born in England, but at the age of 2 immigrated to Canada with his parents and 6 siblings, setting up in Prince Edward Island. At age 16, he began his career as an architect, working in Halifax with David Stirling. He's known for designing many well-known buildings in the Maritimes over his 40-year career, including Trinity Anglican Church in Sydney Mines in 1903, St. James Church in Herring Cove, and parts of Victoria Row in Sydney, completed in 1885. Well, by the time Harris arrived in Myra, Italian work crews were already in the forest clearing land, and the foundations for a future power plant had already been built. In Sydney, businesses were so excited that they actually hung lithographs in their stores, which indicated what this future town would look like. 12 miles of road, double-decker railway lines, 4 stores, 43 miners' cottages, a church, a school, and not 1, but 2 state-of-the-art hotels. The town and associated coal mine had been named Broughton after the English home to many of the financiers of the project. After all, what better way to encourage money to flow than naming a town for those supplying the money? Before the 1900s, the area was called the Cow Bay Backlands, and then it was changed to Milton before finally becoming Broughton. There is a story, which may or may not be true, that a young girl who lived in the Cow Bay backlands went to the United States to work in a place called Milton, Massachusetts. When she later came home to be married, the minister misunderstood where she was from and wrote Milton Town as her address. It's said the name stuck and the Cow Bay backlands became Milton before soon after being changed to Broughton as a mine and town was developed. So yes, Broughton was to be a town, but it was anchored by a coal mine. And that coal mine had competition from the Dominion Coal Company. Now, the Dominion Coal Company owned most of the substantial mine interest in what is now industrial Cape Breton. They also controlled all the railways at the time, and they were not about to help a competitor. This was the first of many challenges that the investors in Broughton would face. For the Broughton mines to be successful, coal would have had to have been shipped either to Sydney or Louisbourg. But the main Sydney to Louisbourg rail line was operated by Dominion. In fact, Dominion had acquired numerous private rail lines and consolidated them. They extended their lines to Louisbourg in 1895 and wanted to be sure they were the only ones. Mayhew and Lancaster told investors they would build their own rail line. But Dominion was a mammoth entity and bought up some of the land Broughton would have required to build the mine. By 1910, they would incorporate their lines into a system called the Sydney and Louisbourg Railway. And by 1912, they were operating 16 collieries and producing 40% of Canada's coal. No railway, blocked land. Well, that should have been the end of the dream of Broughton. But Mayhew and Lancaster kept raising money. You know, no one asked why it was that they were planning this town when they didn't even have all the land in place that they needed for the mine that would support the town. That would be one of many questions that would be asked in hindsight. And so, planning for the town continued. And so will I, on to the former town site after the break.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
I'm on the old Ferguson Road in search of the remains of the former town of Broughton. You know, at one time, Broughton was supposed to become one of Canada's premier places to live, but it was never to be. Now it's an almost forgotten place in the Cape Breton woods. Mayhew and Lancaster sold millions of dollars in bonds to mostly English investors with the promise the money would be used to build a coal mine and rail line from Broughton to Louisbourg. By 1910, Dominion Coal had consolidated their railways and were on track to be Canada's largest coal supplier. Shareholder documents for the Cape Breton Coal, Iron and Railway Company suggested it had $700,000 in assets in buildings, railways, hotels, and mine development. A relatively small number given the amount which had been raised, which itself was peculiar. But on top of that, it was pretty clear that little of that investment was related to any Broughton mine. Mine development. So with all that money, there had to be a mine, right? Not really. Records from the day show that when the investors thought all their money was going towards the operation of a coal mine, there's actually no real coal mining going on in this area. And there was certainly no railroad which would have been required to take that product to market. Now, there's an awful lot of speculation about what's going on. Did the investors know that their money was going to build a town rather than a mine? Were Mayhew and Lancaster raising money with no intention of ever finishing the project in order to subsidize some other business venture? No one's quite sure. If you go to the north and northwest of this trail, you will find wetland and scrub brush that on the plans were intended to be large subdivisions, neatly laid out in rows with lots very unlike nearby Cape Breton coal towns like Glace Bay and Donkin. No, these were laid out like New York City with a perfect grid, laid out by a Sydney-based civil engineer by the name of N.C. Henniger, all ready for Harris's architectural designs to make it a reality. And of course, some of that did become a reality, but only 10% of Harris's plans for the town were actually constructed. By 1906, there were as many as 1,000 people living in Broughton, but that's a number less than a tenth of what was anticipated. In the same year, Lancaster, the one who brought Mayhew on board and pushed the project, suddenly resigned without reason. By 1907, the Cape Breton Coal, Iron and Railway Company was bankrupt, and by 1912, Broughton was abandoned. So Broughton did have some unexpected success. It was 1915. World War I was raging in Europe, and there was a call to create a Nova Scotia battalion. There ended up being so much interest, 2 battalions were created. One of those was the Cape Breton Highlanders. 1,200 men about to become soldiers descended upon Broughton. One of the hotels was turned into a hospital, recreation center, and mess. The schoolhouse became a movie theater. There was electricity, telephone service, housing, and space. The battalion, perhaps unsurprisingly, had a strong pipe and drum contingent. But the end was near for Broughton. The battalion moved to Aldershot near Kentville on May 26, 1916, where they received final training before being sent to England in the fall of that same year. Despite being formed as a group, the Highlanders Battalion never saw battle together. Instead, they were split up and used to replace casualties or other soldiers rotating out of battle. A vision for the Highlanders that, much like the town of Broughton, never really materialized as expected. And there is one more part to that story. Just before the Highlanders left Broughton for Aldershot, Broughton Arms Hotel that they were using burned to the ground. This is all that's left now of the Broughton Arms Hotel. It was completed and opened in 1905, and Lancaster moved in that very same year. It had covered verandas and round towers, marking it as a place of prestige. In fact, it was considered to be the very best hotel in Canada east of Montreal. Now, imagine here in the woods, in what is now the ghost town of Broughton, this hotel had the very first revolving door in North America. As modern as Harris's designs may have been, they were not exactly progressive from a social point of view. Mining towns were very much structured on a hierarchy, and Harris reinforced that. For example, while the Broughton Hotel was prestigious, the nearby Crown Hotel was squarely aimed at the working man. It had no shaded verandas or places for people to relax and enjoy their time. Well, I just came out the veranda door. This would have been the big covered porch, and this would have been one of those rounded turrets. People would have been sitting here looking out at the lake. There's a trail that goes down there now. And just thinking about how much money they were going to make in the coal mine. In letters to his brother in 1905, Harris appeared very happy living and working here in Broughton. Unfortunately, he died young in 1913 at the age of 59. His executors tried to collect on the outstanding bills for his work here, but it appears those went unpaid. The Broughton story is one his descendants would rather forget. After all, a website listing all of his achievements makes no mention of Broughton. And maybe that's no surprise. After all, this may have been an elaborate scam. Despite historical records suggesting the company went bankrupt in 1912, there is a letter on record in the Nova Scotia Archives from 1914 where one of the Mayhew descendants is claiming to represent the Cape Breton Coal, Iron and Railway Company, discussing the price of coal from that season. It's yet another twist in an intriguing story about a community that is long gone, leaving mostly questions. Well, this hill was the site of the proposed Broughton coal mine, and this is where that test coal actually came out of. And had this mine been successful, the town would have been right around it. I don't know whether it was a scam or maybe the investors just underestimated how much money and work it would take to create a working coal mine and town, especially in light of competition from the Dominion Coal Company. But despite being unsuccessful here, coal mining has had a long and important history on Cape Breton Island. There is one remaining coal mine operating in industrial Cape Breton, and it is the Donkin mine. And that's where I'll be after the break.
Feel the sunshine.
The history of industrial Cape Breton is linked to coal mining, and that is no more true than it is in Donkin, which is literally built on the back of coal mines. This spot here at Schooner Pond is one of the places where the first settlers to Donkin arrived, and it's where coal mining continues to this day. A dramatic hiking opportunity around Cape Pierce reminds you of the history and the present of coal mining. And it's where I'm on my walkabout today. Well, if you had any doubt that this was a coal mining area, the proof is found right along the beach. It's not too often you see actual pieces of coal on the ground. One of the very first coal mines in this area was the 1863 Acadia mine operation, which was located between where I am and the community center of Donkin. Initially, coal would have been taken by ship to Sydney and exported from there. But by 1874, a railway was built to transport the coal. In 1893, Dominion Coal signed a 99-year lease of all the coal fields to the northeast of Sydney. By 1904, the Dominion No. 6 colliery was constructed, and people came from all over the globe to work here. That colliery was constructed right under the town, and maps of mine workings show that much of the town had mining directly below. While many locals obviously took jobs in the mines, immigration from Europe was strong because, of course, folks coming over from Europe had a lot of experience in the mines. Now, if you worked for the mine, your life was intertwined with it. You probably lived in a house that was owned by the mining company. You bought everything from groceries to other goods at the company store. You literally worked to pay your debts to the company. And the stress of that and the unfairness of that ultimately resulted in a number of strikes. But a particular one in 1925 was marked by significant violence and destruction, and is a landmark event in Nova Scotia history. There have been a number of mine shafts around this community. The current one, which most refer to as the Donkin mine, was built in 1982 by the Cape Breton Development Corporation, or DevCo, before it shuttered its mine operations in 2001. Between 2014 and 2015, Cameron Collieries took over the operations and began the process of removing seawater from the 3.6 kilometers of access tunnels in the mine used to reach the coal face. Production began in 2017. The plan was for a 30-year lifespan, mining 3 million metric tons of saleable coal per year. But the mine closed in 2020 when falling rock in the collieries and collapsing coal prices brought the project to a halt. The mine once again reopened in September of 2022 as coal prices increased. The sea is absolutely covered in lobster buoys today, and that's because it is lobster season in Donkin, but there is so much more going on out there. Coal mining in this area was particularly dangerous. And that's because, although there are some surface outcrops in the Sydney coal fields, the vast majority of mining in this area was under the ocean. The buildings on this site, well, they don't mark where the coal mine is. Instead, they mark the entrance to the coal shafts and the way that miners got into the coal face and the way the coal was brought out from the coal face. Those shafts travel anywhere from 3 to 4 kilometers from shore. And then, of course, those mines are below the seabed, and that made it extremely dangerous and extremely tricky. This trail doesn't so much skirt the coal mining operations, but rather walks over the very shafts miners are traveling on their way to and from work. In a regular underground mine, ventilation shafts and emergency exit shafts can be constructed along the route. That is impossible with undersea mining, making it all the more dangerous. This also means that while there might continue to be coal further and further out, at a certain point the distance is so great it becomes infeasible to continue mining. The current mine uses what is called a room and pillar technique, where coal is removed in the shape of rooms, while some coal remains like the pillars of a house to keep the mine workings from collapsing and the ocean flooding the mine. If you want to get a visual sense of just how far those coal shafts travel from land, well, in the distance is Flint Island and the Flint Island Lighthouse, and that's about 3 kilometers from shore. So the coal shafts would travel even further than that. Now, Flint Island Lighthouse is a little bit unique because most lighthouses in Canada were built by the federal government. That one was built in 1856 by the province of Nova Scotia. And it presented its own challenges because it is a rocky outcrop. The only way that you could get fresh water was to actually collect rainwater. The Flint Island Lighthouse was an important signal station for the many coal boats plying these waters. And coal mines in industrial Cape Breton have a complex relationship with the communities, from labor strife to environmental concerns, to the contributions to the economy and the growth of the island. When the Devco mines closed, I spoke to a miner who worked in the Prince mine, and it really was a mixed bag of emotions. You know, he was worried that he was losing his job years before he was supposed to retire, but he was also thankful that his family would no longer have to worry about whether he would make it home at night. He would be safe. And that's the thing about the Cape Breton mines. There are always questions. Even the mine operating here recently had a fire and was shut down for some time. Mines are inherently dangerous. Cape Breton folk singer Alistair McGilvery wrote a lot about the coal mines, and one of his most famous tunes is Coal Town Road, and it really captures the entire emotion of that. At the end of it, it says, "When the shift comes up on top, we're so thankful to be done, to go home and dream and think about the Coal Town Road." Wherever your next walkabout finds you, I hope you take the time to think about all the things that have happened in the history of the places you're hiking.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine. Oh, hey. Oh, hey. Oh, hey. Feel the sunshine. Hey, come on, feel the sunshine.